presentation with my voice. Let me get this going. All right, so these notes are on animal behavior part 2, and we're going to be focusing on different types of learning and social versus cognitive behaviors, and at the end, a little bit of some psychology and things. As I'm talking, if I start going too fast, just have somebody pause the notes so you can get caught up. This is also, as you know, posted on Echo, so you have that as a resource so that you can go back and refer to it later. So the first type of learning we're going to be talking about is called habituation. And habituation occurs when there's loss of response to a stimulus. So essentially, you've experienced something a whole bunch of times, and because of that, it becomes habitual. It's something that you don't respond to anymore because you're so used to it. This is known as the crying wolf effect. So in this children's story, a little boy cries wolf, he says there's a wolf here, there's a wolf here, there's a wolf here, and then finally everyone starts ignoring him because they've heard him say it so many times. But then finally a wolf actually comes and he eats the little boy because no one comes to help him because he's just lied about there being a wolf so many times. In the animal kingdom, this looks like a decrease in response to a repeated occurrence of stimulus. So it enables animals to disregard unimportant stimuli. It's actually really important because otherwise animals would respond to absolutely everything around them. They'd be really distracted, and then when something actually happened that they needed to respond to, they would be less engaged and tuned into it. We are able to do this too. So if you think about yourself in a classroom, people are doing stuff around you all the time, but you're able to focus in on what's important and ignore all of the different stimuluses around you, disregard those unimportant stimuli, and get your work done. An example of this is falling leaves not triggering a fear response in baby birds. So birds experience leaves falling around them all the time, and this is something that's really unnatural and could make a bird fearful, but they experience it so often that they lose their response to it and eventually become just totally used to it and they don't respond. This next type of learning we're going to talk about is called imprinting. This is when you learn to form social attachments at a specific critical period of time. And this has both learning and innate components. So some parts of this are built into the animals. Other parts of it are something that are learned. So I'm going to check the next slide. Okay. All right, so this guy over here, Konrad Lorenz, he spent time with geese hours after they were hatched, and all of those geese were able to imprint on him. So essentially, when the geese are born, they sense whoever or whatever is around them. Oftentimes it's the mother goose, but if the mom goose isn't there, then they will imprint and think that whatever is around them is their mom. So in the case of Conrad, he was there. The baby geese thought he was their mother, and they would follow him around just like baby geese follow their mom around in a pond. The critical period is the sensitive phase for optimal imprinting. So this is the time when some behavior must be learned during this period. Otherwise, the animal will never ever learn it. So, for example, in the previous slide, those geese, they imprinted at a specific time in their lives that allowed them to know who their mom was. If that mom wasn't there when the baby was born, within a certain number of hours, the geese would not imprint. Here, we're talking about songbirds, and there's a time between when the songbirds hatch and when they're 50 days old that they are listening to all of the other songbirds around them. And it's during that time that they're learning how to make the songs that are important in their life. If they don't learn the songs between the time they hatch and the time they're 50 days old, then they won't be able to sing songs like other birds. The next type of learning is called associative learning. So this is essentially when you learn to associate some kind of stimulants with some kind of consequence or result. There's two different types of associative learning, and the first one is called operant conditioning. Operant conditioning was discovered and investigated mostly by this famous psychologist named B.F. Skinner. And what B.F. Skinner was, he put rats in different boxes and connected sugary treats with pressing a lever. So when the rats pressed a lever, a sugary treat would be released to them. This is how, over time, he found that the rats were able to learn to press that lever, and over time, he removed the sugar treats, but the rats would continue to push the lever, thinking that they would get a treat if they did push it. This is also known as trial and error learning. So, an animal tries something out, sees if it gets a reward, and if it does, it continues to do it that way. If it doesn't get a reward, then it tries something different, and it continues until it finds something that works for it. It associates a behavior with some kind of reward or some kind of punishment. So the animal learns, if I do this, I get this reward. If I do this, I get this punishment, and it acts in that way. An example of this is teaching your dog to do a trick by offering it a treat. You teach your dog how to shake, and if the dog shakes, you give it a treat. And so that, therefore, the dog knows if it raises up its paw and puts it in your hand, then you're going to reward it with a treat. Similarly, if you punish your dog, you yell at it or something after it pees on the carpet, then the dog knows that when it pees on the carpet, it's going to get yelled at. That's bad. That's a punishment. It's going to stop peeing on the carpet. The second type of associative learning is called classical conditioning. This is also known as Pavlovian conditioning, after a famous scientist named Pavlov. This is when a stimulus is associated with some kind of reward or punishment. So here it experiences something happening, a sound, a noise, and immediately following that, a reward or punishment occurs. It doesn't have anything to do with the behavior. The behavior comes second. Here's a picture of Skinner's box in operant conditioning. You can see a little mouse is in there. He pushes his lever. As the lever is pushed, the pellet is released, and he gets his treat. In classical conditioning, which were by Ivan Pavlov, he had dogs, and he connected the reflex behavior to associated stimulants. So essentially here what happened was he would ring a bell, he would then give the dog food, and that would cause the dog to start to salivate. And he did this many, many times until eventually you could just ring the bell and then the dog would begin salivating, even if the dog was not given a treat. Here, the stimulus resulted in, the stimulus was related to a reward or a punishment, which then resulted in a behavior. Different than back with operant conditioning, where a behavior, the mouse pushing a lever, resulted in a reward or punishment. The next type of learning is called cognition. Cognition is the ability for a nervous system to store, perceive, and process information. As humans, cognition is something that's really, really important for us, and it's how we function. Our brains store a lot of information, they perceive a lot of things, and they process a lot of things. But there are some animals that are very good at cognition as well. There are two basic things that animals do that tell us that they can that they use cognition. The first one is tool use. So things like animals like chimpanzees use a lot of tools to accomplish various tasks. And the second is problem solving. In one classic study, chimps were put into a room with 3 boxes and bananas up on the ceiling where the chimp couldn't reach. Over time, the chimpanzee piled up the boxes and then was able to reach the bananas. This showing the chimp was able to problem solve. Other animals that are able to use tools and to problem solve include crows, parrots, and dogs. Other animals can do this as well. These are just a few examples. All right, we're next going to move on to talk about social behavior. So, there are three basic social behaviors that we see in the animal kingdom. The first are animals that are largely solitary and join up with a member of the opposite sex only for mating. The reason that these animals get together is solely to reproduce, not because they prefer to live in environments with other animals. Examples of this include large cats like tigers, lions, cheetahs, panthers, and bears. Other animals pair and bond and cooperate in the raising of their offspring, similar to humans. We tend to come together as a pair, form deep relationships, and then raise our children together. In the animal kingdom, examples of this include eagles and otters. And then finally, there's a third group that form a society in which members are organized in a cooperative manner. So here, things like dolphins and meerkats, when a baby is born, that baby is raised by the entire community. It's similar to the saying, it takes a village. So here, a baby's born to one meerkat mama, but it doesn't matter who the meerkat mama is, all meerkat mamas will take care of that baby. They work together to make sure that their offspring are taken care of and raised well. Social behaviors are characterized by the interactions that occur between animals in a population. They tend to develop as evolutionary adaptations. So some social behaviors are very beneficial, some are very harmful. The ones that are good allow that as animals to survive, reproduce, and results in evolution. There are four main types of social behaviors listed there, and we're going to talk about each of those on the next slides. So the first one is agnostic behaviors. Agnostic behaviors are characterized by threatening and submissive rituals. Usually these are symbolic and there's not much harm done. So here you see some tortoises. One of them is kind of like growling at each other. The tortoise is not actually going to hurt his friend there, but he's trying to get rid of him, keep him out of his ground. So the main reason for this has to do with territoriality, so wanting to keep your land safe, and just in general being aggressive towards competitors. The next type of hierarchy is dominance. The next type of social behavior is called dominance hierarchy. So this is when social rankings exist within a group. Essentially, it's a pecking order. So here, higher ranking animals have greater access to resource than a lower ranking animal. Within the group of animals, they know that's the highest ranking animal and he gets whatever he wants, and then we all take whatever's left over. This is usually decided by confrontation, during which one animal gives way to another. So the stronger prevail, they become higher up in the ranking. Oftentimes, this will result in a dominant male that's able to mate more often with females. So thinking about this, you can think about the evolutionary significance and the fact that the dominant male is going to be the strongest male in a herd or a pack, and it's mating more, meaning that the offspring will in general be stronger and more successful, which means that the entire population over time is going to increase, be better, be stronger, and survive longer. I mentioned territoriality earlier. It plays into both of these, but essentially it's the idea of protecting an area against other individuals. Male songbirds are really known to be territoriality, and other males know to stay away because they hear the singing of the songbird that marks the territory. The song also is going to alert females that there's a male there and hey, you should come over and have a visit. It's thought that this actually might be an adaptive behavior because it tends to reduce conflict, and reducing conflict means that it's less likely for the species to die. It can also control population growth and ensure that the most efficient use of resources is occurring because it's spacing organisms out throughout a habitat. All right, cooperation is the next social behavior. So this is essentially just working together in coordination when a group of animals comes together to try to be successful. So here are two examples of that. The top one is a pack of African dogs that are hunting a wildebeest. They're all hunting it together. One of those dogs wouldn't be able to take down a wildebeest on its own, but together they'll be able to be successful. And then down at the bottom are some pelicans that are herding a school of fish. They're all surrounding the fish, trying to get them in so that all the pelicans are able to eat. And then finally, we have altruistic behavior. This is when a species or an animal reduces its own individual fitness, but in turn increases the fitness of others in a population. So, an example of this is kin selection. This is when the increasing survival of the close relatives passes the genes to the next generation. An example of altruistic behavior is in insects like bees, where the queen bee and her mate are the only ones that reproduce. So, this is not good for the queen bee. It's bad to just be the only one that reproduces. It's going to reduce her fitness overall. She's going to probably die sooner than other bees would. However, it increases the fitness of the whole population because the queen bee becomes the queen because she has the best genes in the population. Speaking of reproduction, so when we think about social behavior and reproduction, they're very closely tied to each other. Over time, natural selection has favored the mechanisms that promote successful reproduction. Because of this, behavior becomes adaptive, and behavioral traits can evolve over time. If a specific behavior is better than others, that animal with the good behavior is going to survive longer. Sexual competition among males has also contributed to the evolution of large size and bright colors, lots of antlers, things like that. And having these bright colors, larger size, larger antlers, all of that has resulted in more development of social behavior. If more animals have bright colors for breeding, then they're going to find different ways to show that off to their mates to try to get the females that they want. This is known as sexual selection, and these traits, like the large size, breeding colors, antlers, etc., are called secondary sexual characteristics. They're not our primary sexual characteristics, which have to do with the different sexual organs that we have, or that animals have in general, but have to do with the other traits that are related to that animal sex and developed as a result of sexual selection. This has resulted in over time with courtship rituals between animals that are super long, super elaborate, and really show off the different traits species have. Courtship rituals can serve as a sign signal to trigger nest building and ovulation. So in birds, they see this happening and they start building nests. In other animals, it can trigger ovulation. Some examples of this is male spider offering food to the female, making it known that it's time to mate. And in this picture here, the female praying mantis actually eating the head off of the male praying mantis. In these other pictures, here's a male bird showing its big red chest and neck, and here is a male lizard sticking out its little red flap there trying to get a female. All right, this last part just has to do with a little bit of a psychological argument about, what influences all this behavior more, nature or nurture? So the genetics or the environment in which the animal was raised in. So one thing we know for sure is that behavior is absolutely shaped by environmental influences, which is nurture. This is 100% true. We don't know how much it contributes, but it definitely contributes. Studies of human twins have been used to determine to what extent the behavior is inherited. So essentially what they've done is they've taken twins, they've placed them in two different environments, and they've tried to figure out how similar do these twins become behaviorally. One thing that we do know is that fraternal twins who are born from 2 different eggs and 2 different sperms, even when they're raised together in the exact same house under this exact same situation, don't have similar behaviors. They're often very different individuals, which tells us that a lot of behavior is, in fact, nature. It's inherited. Identical twins, however, even when raised separately, are sometimes very, very similar. So, for example, one famous study has a set of German twins. One was raised in Germany, one was adopted and raised in the Caribbean. They found when they were reunited later that both really liked sweet candy, both had rubber bands on their wrists, they both read magazines from back to front, so they started at the back, read to the front. That's a weird thing. They both dipped buttered toast in their coffee, and they had really similar personalities. These were 2 twins who had never met each other, were raised in totally different parts of the world, and yet their behaviors were very similar, which tells us that some of that behavior had to have been related to their genetics or the nature. Considering this, we think the data shows that about 50% of human personality traits are due to polygenic inheritance, the nature part, the genes, and 50% are due to the environmental influences that we experience growing up as children. All right, that brings me to the end of these notes. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'll be checking my email over the next couple of days. Other than that, you have that to work with, and I will see you all on Monday. Bye.